Prabhupada arranged like this. So, I just.
We lost Chaturatma Prabhu. He's going to rejoin. Chaturatma Prabhu, come back. Oh, Krishna, save us. Maybe he doesn't know he's... Okay, here he is. All right.
Now, I should be back now, right?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Amateur move, like I never do this before. I'm online all the time. My apologies. So we'll start right in with the verse. I'll chant the verse itself, the transliteration, and then go with the translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Tataham kripana subru bhagavata prema yantri tai atmanam nabijana bi me mohitas tavamayaya. Tata, exactly like the he-goat. Aham, I. Kripana, a miser with no sense of the importance of life. Subru, oh my wife with beautiful eyebrows. Bhagavatya, in your company. Prema yantrita, as if tied with love, although actually it is lust. Atmanam, self-realization, namely what I am and what my duty is. Na abhijanami, I could not realize even until now. Mohita, being bewildered. Tava, your. Mayaya, by the materially attractive feature. Translation. Oh, my dear wife with beautiful eyebrows, I am exactly like that he-goat, for I am so poor in intelligence that I am captivated by your beauty and have forgotten the real task of self-realization. Purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. If one remains a victim of the so-called beauty of his wife, his family life is nothing but a dark well. Hit Vatma Patam Griham Anandakupam. Existence in such a dark well is certainly suicidal. If one wants relief from the miserable condition of material life, one must voluntarily give up all lusty relationship with his wife. Otherwise, there is no question of self-realization. Unless one is extremely advanced in spiritual consciousness, household life is nothing but a dark well in which one commits suicide. Prahlad Maharaj therefore recommended that in due time, at least in one's 50th year, one must give up household life and go to the forest. Vanam gatoya darim ashrayat. There, one should seek shelter of the lotus feet of Sri Hari. Om Jnana Tamarandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chaksa Unmilitam Yanatasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Lam Jayate Girim Yakripa Tamaham Bande Sri Gurum Dinitarina Vancha Kapaturubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bahevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. My only constant companion, my only friend, my guru, my wealth, that which has delivered me, my great fortune, and the source of my good luck, the form through which I taste pleasure, my obeisances unto you, O Srimad Bhagavatam. Excuse me. If we look at the spiritual world, we have this vast, unlimited area. 1/4 of that unlimited area, if we can imagine a quarter of something that's unlimited, 1/4 of that unlimited area is the material realm. That realm which is completely the opposite of the spiritual realm in all of its qualities and activities. In that material world, in that material realm, there are endless universes. And in those endless universes, there is one in which our planetary system exists. And in our planetary system, the 14 planetary systems of our area, there are unlimited planets. Now, on one of those planets called Earth, there are unlimited countries. And of those unlimited countries, there's one called the United States of America. And in the United States of America, there are unlimited cities, like New York City, where you all are, some of you, where we're broadcasting from. In New York City, there are around 9 million people, plus another million that commute in during the day. And in the midst of all those people, we're sitting there thinking that we're a very big deal, that we're a very important person. This is the false ego. The identity that I am of some great, significant, universal value. Additionally, the materialists think that they're very, very good at sex life. Excellent. There was one famous musician that for some time dabbled in tantric yoga and used that to his advantage for his sexual prowess, and went on various interviews and talk shows and whatever, and spoke quite highly about his expertise in this field. What expertise? Rabbits, they do it so much more frequently. Horses, they have a very, very great endurance. Pigs, they have more in a litter than a human being can ever imagine, and so on and so on and so on in the animal kingdom. So as a human being, we're not that important, and our sexual prowess is not that significant. So both of these combine to create an immense amount of false ego in the living entity. Now, this section of the Srimad Bhagavatam, particularly these 2 chapters, they're very, very heavy on this subject, and very, very heavy on the need to become free from this attractive feature of sexual activity. This is not a subject that devotees oftentimes will talk about with each other, but we see it as an important subject in our freedom from material entanglement, in our freedom from being bound to another birth in this material world. The storyline that we're reading about Maharaj Yayati, it actually dates back a bit, which we'll get into that. It actually dates back a bit. And the entire storyline of entanglement for these characters all centers around this attraction to the most base principle of material existence. And although the storyline is quite graphic, you've been with us for the previous verses where there's great detail as to the entanglement this poor he-goat has found himself into, and Yayati himself. So, but the subject matter, it's rudimentary Bhagavad-Gita. We may be seeing it presented in a different circumstance here, but it's rudimentary Bhagavad-Gita. And what is that? That we're not this body. That we are Aham Brahmasmi. That we are the spirit soul. That we are not identified with this physical frame and these subtle and gross senses that we're constantly seeking to satisfy. The senses are not our true source of enjoyment. Every first month, what to speak of first year Bhakta, learns this principle when studying Bhagavad Gita. They learn this understanding that we are not the body, we are not the senses, they cannot be satisfied. I'm known for doing fire juggos, and that extends to my liking to have a nice bonfire in my backyard here. And with that bonfire, once I get it going nicely, it does not matter how much wood I put into it, bonfire's not going out. the more wood I put, the more it burns. So the very concept or idea that if we keep satisfying the senses, whatever sense, here we happen to be talking about the sexual activity, but whether it's the sex organ or the tongue or the ears or the eyes, whatever, any of the senses, if I strive to satisfy them thinking that will bring me fulfillment, it's an illusion. This is what we learned from Bhagavad Gita. This is what Prabhupada taught us from the very beginning. Seeking this pleasure will not bring us happiness. It may bring us some short-term material pleasure, but a person of intelligence does not equate that short-term material pleasure with long-term spiritual benefit. So now at this point, I could say, okay, end of class. Any questions? Because that principle right there basically gives the synopsis for this whole presentation. But I do have hope of getting invited back for another class sometime in the future, so I can't just abandon ship in the middle like this. So let's look a little bit deeper into this particular subject and the persons in this chapter here. Now, as we know, King Yayati had 5 other siblings. And it's the tradition in the Vedic culture that the older brother, that his example would be followed. And the older brother wasn't Yayati. And this example of the elder brother, had Yayati followed it, would have benefited him much more than the path he chose. But instead, he took after the path of his father. Now, to be fair, let's just say his father had a pretty uncontrolled libido. I mean, we find here that he actually molested the wife of Indra, the king of the demigods. So not only was he driven by his senses, but he didn't even have the intelligence of who to pursue in this manner. The wife of the king. Not only any king, not the king of one country or the king of a planet, but the king of the entire heavenly realm. That would indicate someone with a little bit of potency to retaliate if something were to go awry, which, of course, it did. Now, interestingly enough, in these 2 chapters, Srila Prabhupada doesn't give a purport on many of these verses, particularly this verse which describes how he attacked the wife of Indra. Prabhupada only gives purports periodically throughout these 2 chapters on this subject. And when he does, the purports that he gives, they're focused on the principle of striving for spiritual advancement, of abandoning material activity and striving for spiritual perfection. This is the goal of these 2 chapters. This we can understand is why this storyline is presented in the midst of Srimad Bhagavatam. It would be a fair question to ask why in the discussion of Krishna Katha, the pastimes and the glories of Krishna and his devotees, are we having this story of a king who is excessively driven by the desire for sex to the point that, well, we know the story, certain bodily parts get removed. And so in this way, we could question that. And the answer would be quite simple, because it gives an example of what we find in the material world. And as we know from Shri Upanishad, we have to cultivate nescience and science side by side. We can't just be on the spiritual platform with no understanding of how the material world works. Neither can we be exclusively on the material platform with no understanding of how the spiritual realm works. We have to follow them, understanding both and their place within each other, so that we can properly have an intelligence to distance ourselves from the material aspect and focus entirely on the spiritual aspect. Now, in the previous chapter, it's noted in the verse and in Prabhupada's purport, I quote, "When one enters the post of king or head of the government, one cannot understand the meaning of self-realization. And then in the purport, Prabhupada says, it is specifically mentioned here that if one enters into political life, especially in our modern day, one loses the chance for human perfection. Now, someone might question that. Well, that's the perfection of human life, to become a big leader, to have influence, to be well known, to have a position. That may be true if you're completely focused in the material realm. But the real chance of human perfection described in the Bhagavatam is perfection of devotional life, perfection of Krishna consciousness, perfection of our sadhana. In other words, understanding the spiritual nature. This is the real indicated perfection of human life in this verse. Therefore, if we look around us today, it's very easy to see how this verse applies. And, not only this country, it doesn't have to be this country or this particular political climate we're in here. Look at any country. Look at any example of world leaders. They are not pursuing as their ultimate goal perfection of human life, as described in this verse. So for this reason alone, Yati, the elder brother of Yayati, abandoned all of that. He had the intelligence to pursue spiritual life. He knew, if I get entangled in these political activities, if I get entangled in this position of leadership, if I take up the role of my father, then my human life is going to be wasted. So this is why he abandoned that path and became a renunciate. As we noted, Yayati after him then took up the path of his father. And while being a good leader, Yayati was a good king. He did look after his subjects. He took care of them. To use the phrase, he was lusty as a dog. We sometimes describe that, if you have some food stuff you're preparing, just for instance, it's very important that the plates, when one transfers the offerings for the Lord from the kitchen to the altar, that they're covered. Because anyone seeing these, some lusty desire may arise. Now, if you happen to be walking through a group of devotees and it happens to not be covered, a devotee will know, oh, I should look here, this is meant for the Lord. But if you bring a dog in, a dog has no understanding, and a dog will look lustfully at any type of food to eat, at any other she-dog, at all of these types of situations. So thus the phrase that we commonly hear, lusty as a dog. So unfortunately, despite his good leadership, this described the personal character of Yayati. And in the previous chapter, Yayati himself admits this. If we refer back to the verses there, text 35, King Yayati, who was very lusty, followed his wife, caught her, and tried to appease her by speaking pleasing words and massaging her feet. But he could not satisfy her by any means. 36, Sukacharya was extremely angry. You untruthful fool, lusting after women. You have done a great wrong. I therefore curse you to be attacked and disfigured by old age and invalidity. Now, if we stop right there, for anyone who is keen to pursue their senses, to enjoy sense gratification, the very idea of old age and invalidity is frightening. Now, I can tell you, because I'm a little older than some of you, well, quite a bit older than some of you, as you get older, it all stops working. You see, I've got glasses. I've just had 2 knees replaced. The digestion isn't quite what it was. When I was a young brahmachari, I could take down 12 cups of sweet rice at the Sunday feast without even thinking about it, and then maybe look for some more. Now, I'll do a cup of sweet rice. All right, maybe another half. Okay, I'm done. My wife made some wonderful sweet rice for Srila Prabhupada here in our home on his disappearance day. I had 2 spoonfuls of it last night. So the idea of old age and invalidity is frightening to one who is in pursuant of their senses. So Sukracharya curses Yayati in this way. Yayati responds to him, O learned, worshipable Brahmana, I have not yet satisfied my lusty desires with your daughter. How base is he that outright he will admit to the father-in-law, I got desires I want to do with your daughter. Come on, give me a break here. This is not the common conversation a respectful husband would have with the father-in-law. Sukracharya then replied, all right, you may exchange your old age with someone who will agree to transfer their youth to you. When Yayati received this benediction from Sukracharya, he requested his eldest son, my dear son Yadu, please give me your youth in exchange for my old age and invalidity. My dear son, I have not yet satisfied my sexual desires, but if you are kind to me, you will take my old age by your material, given by your material grandfather, and I may take your youth so that I may enjoy life for a few years more. Here again, due to that lusty nature, the father is debasing himself even in front of his son. The father should always be an example to the son. The son should always be able to look up to the father and appreciate his activities, appreciate his service, appreciate his example. Here, the father is saying, I've got so many sexual desires I want to fulfill. Swap out with me here. Take my old age so I can have your youth and keep going. I mean, what a lamentable condition, as Prabhupada was saying. So there was no shame for his desire for fulfilling his sexual activity. To the point that once that was agreed upon and he got that youth, again, it says that for some 1,000 years, he pursued sexual enjoyment with his wife. Now, of course, this is in a previous time where the lifespan was much longer, but we see nowadays, Prabhupada used to speak about this regularly. There was a particular lecture where he talks about being in Paris and seeing the old men. They're going into the club, and he says they pay $50 entrance fee. Of course, $50 entrance fee, I guess that's nothing compared to what it must cost now. He was speaking many decades ago. He says they pay $50 entrance fee to go in, and there are young women, and then they pay for other things. And the other things, Prabhupada just lets hang there. We are all quite aware of what those other things are. So in this way, he spends the next 1,000 years pursuing the satisfaction of his sexual desires. Sukadeva Goswami comments on that subject. He says, in due course of time, however, he became disgusted with sexual enjoyment and its bad effects. This is a dire warning to all of us. The senses are going to diminish. And with that diminishing, that waning of the senses, of the mind and the body, came some forced realization by Yayati. And in that moment of introspection is when he begins to relay this story that we're currently in the middle of the he-goat and the she-goat to his wife. He begins to use it as an analogy. Srila Prabhupada, of course, was famous for his analogies. There's an entire book called I forget what it's called, but it's a collection of all of Prabhupada's analogies that we use. And Srimad Bhagavatam itself is filled with these different types of explanations of the principles and teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam. Sometimes when a author is interviewed, they've got a new book coming out and they'll be interviewed by, some particular format. The question will be asked, how much of this book is autobiographical? Trying to reach into the inner meaning of it. Well, in the case of Yayati, this story that he's relating of the he-goat and the she-goat, it's totally autobiographical in every single detail, down to the point of how they met, how beautiful she was, His own handsomeness, it describes he had a very nice mustache and a very strong body. For a goat, a big beard and mustache and strong body is quite a good thing. And his relationship with so many other she-goats, as Yayati had relationships with so many of his co-wives. Every detail down to the part of having the offending body part removed to keep things polite, and then returned and made whole again so the entire cycle of enjoyment could continue. Every bit of that was autobiographical of the story of Yayati himself. And that brings us to the point of today's verse. Right off the bat in this verse today, Yayati notes one of the very beautiful features of his wife, her eyebrows. Now, in today's modern world of cosmetics, the beauty of eyebrows is a very big deal. Some of you men, you may not be so aware of this. I mean, if you're married, you probably are, but anyway, this is a very big deal in the modern cosmetic world. There's an austerity that many ladies perform called plucking the eyebrows. Now, some of us guys have hair growing in places it might not have grown previously, such as the nose and the ear. So, occasionally you have to remove that. And that's quite painful. What to speak of going to the eyebrows and plucking out the ones that are out of place one by one, not just cutting them. I mean, I trim my eyebrows just to keep them from looking unruly, but to actually take something and pull them out and remove them. It's quite painful, but this is a common practice that many ladies pursue for the beauty of the eyebrow, to the point to where in some cultures, the eyebrow hair is removed altogether and then cosmetically drawn back on. Just how painful this is, guys can't imagine. But there it is. That's an austerity. And then there's the idea of what they call weaving them. It's also a big practice right now in the cosmetic industry and the appearance industry, weaving of eyebrows. There's a shop even in our little town here of Alachua where they perform this activity. So none of this, of course, is as dreaded as the uni eyebrow. This is why the plucking goes on, so there's not a uni eyebrow. So all of these descriptions, I probably know a little more about them than I should, but all of these descriptions are there because the eyebrow itself, Krishna's eyebrows are described in so many of the Shastras of the Goswamis, the beautiful arched eyebrows of the Lord, different descriptions of his face and his eyes and like this. So this was, in Damayanti's case, what she had done, clearly. Very well maintained, developed, and manicured eyebrows, to the point that Yayati was very attracted. I mean, a man will be attracted to many different features of a woman. In this case, Yayati is admitting his total attraction to the eyebrows of his wife. Now, Yayati does have some humility. He is a devotee of some sort. So some humility manifests, and he presents it by being very open. Now, not many people would honestly and willingly compare themselves to a senseless, lusty goat. In looking into the animal kingdom as to what animal we think we might want to be, it's the common thing that most people do not pick a lusty, senseless goat running around butting its head against posts and having sex with any other she-goat, whatever. But in this explanation, Yayati has the humility to admit, this is what I'm like. I've lost all perception of real human life, of the benefit. So he draws a very clear, solid line of comparison between the two, the goat and himself. And the conclusion of how these similarities of his life and a goat's life have cost him his spiritual focus. we want to be very careful in our balance, particularly those of us in the household ashram. We want to be very careful in our balance of sense enjoyment, which is there, but regulated, and uncontrolled sense enjoyment. And make sure that we do not allow that to blur the spiritual horizon for us. We see off on the horizon our goal. We don't want that goal to be blurred by our uncontrolled senses. Now, when looking at this verse originally, discussing it with my wife, right off the bat, my wife caught this one point that I thought was pretty significant. And in the first sentence there, the word victim. Oh, my dear wife with beautiful eyebrows, I am exactly like the he-goat. For I am of so poor intelligence, I am captivated by your beauty and forgotten spiritual life. And in the first sentence of his purport, Prabhupada says, if one remains a victim of the so-called beauty of his wife, his family life is a dark well. Now, we use the victim in regards to one who, and I looked this up to get the exact definition. This definition given is one who is harmed, injured, killed, or damaged and destroyed as the results of the crime, accident, or an event or action of others. Each of these descriptions given in the dictionary are totally applicable to the impact of the lust that Yayati has towards his wife. He has been harmed, he has been injured, he has been damaged, and he's been destroyed. Maybe not physically, although that did take place earlier, but particularly in the spiritual sense. His spiritual life has been harmed by his uncontrolled lusty desires. His spiritual life has been injured. It's been damaged, and for all practical purposes, it's been destroyed. In addition, our friend Mr. Webster gives one other definition that I thought was very interesting. A person who is tricked or duped, one who is the victim of a hoax. Is that not the perfect description of the scenario? Yayati has been tricked. He's bought into a hoax that the senses are going to satisfy him. You know, we all get that occasional email from some African bank manager who needs our assistance. And if we can just supply him with some information, he's got $500,000 waiting to be given to us. And when we get that, we know what it is. It's a hoax. It's not real. Now, this is the great result of being a victim for Yayati. He's been duped and tricked, and he's bought in completely to the hoax that his senses are going to satisfy him, that his attraction to his wife and all of her maidservants, because it wasn't just her, that this is going to bring him not only satisfaction and pleasure, but total fulfillment. So likewise, if we think that we can achieve happiness in this life, either by, sensual enjoyment with our wife or by the pursuit of any of the senses, we're also living in a hoax. Now, let me be very clear here. This storyline is a two-way street. This isn't all about the wife being the desired object and the downfall of the husband. This goes either way. The husband and wife both have to have the same spiritual vision towards each other. The idea that the spouse, husband or wife, is there for our sensual satisfaction will deteriorate the foundation of the marriage. It will cause a mood of exploitation, and that mood of exploitation will deteriorate the respect that one has for each other. This is why my wife right off the bat saw becoming a victim. That when one allows oneself to become the victim of exploitation, then the spiritual focus, the spiritual perfection of human life becomes deteriorated. Again, basic Bhagavad Gita. We're not the body. We are not all about enjoying our senses. This is, right off the bat, the senses are not going to bring us that true pleasure. So seeking pleasure through our material senses, this will never bring us happiness. It'll never bring us complete fulfillment. So we have to put that type of pleasure aside. As Prabhupada says, we spent so many lives trying to satisfy the senses. This one life, just give it to Krishna. So now the question will naturally arise, and it could be put forward by a devotee even at this point. Do I give up the affection and attraction I have for my spouse? This is not the purpose of these chapters, to cause us to abandon our responsibility, to cause us to give up any attraction or affection for our family members. That must be there. We must have attraction and affection for someone, to care for them, to work with them, to live with them, to serve with them. That all has to be there. You can't do that with someone you don't like. There is a need in society for householders, a very important need. Householders are the means of support, both financially and functionally, for the other three orders. The brahmacharis, they depend on the householders, and actually they come from the householders. The vanaprasthas depend on the householders, and they are a result of the householders. And the sannyasis depend on the householders and can be the ultimate goal of the householders. Not every householder is going to end up as a sannyasi. Every householder should come to the point of renouncing their sense gratification. So therefore, a functioning, solid, and stable household ashram is mandatory for society at large. It must be there to bring about a smooth functioning society. And while this was certainly true in past ages, it's also true in our modern age. In this jet age, technology-based, world where sannyasis are able to travel and preach all over the world. How did Prabhupada get to America? By going to a grihastha, Sumati Murarji, and convincing her to give him passage on a steamship crossing the oceans. And by that travel, which she facilitated from the means circulated in her household ashram business, he was able to come and preach. So the householders are there to support and facilitate the preaching of the sannyasis, of the vanaprasthas being renounced, of the brahmacharis being trained. So we see the importance of a good household ashram. Not that because Yayati in this example was uncontrolled, we should just throw everything out. As they say, throw the bathwater and the baby out at the same time. If we look elsewhere in the Srimad Bhagavatam, we find exemplary standards of this. Ajamil was another case. Ajamil also was completely uncontrolled senses. But he and Yayati both spent the bulk of their life pursuing sense enjoyment, pursuing unregulated activity, and putting to the side their spiritual focus. But somehow or another, both of them were ultimately saved at the end. And that is why their lives, although filled with debauchery, become a suitable subject matter for these pages of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So the final question that we can ask ourselves here, is this what we're destined for? Is this how we want to become freed from attachment, all the way up to the, as Prabhupada would say, the fag end of our life, the very end of our existence, to be simply pursuing sense gratification until at some point, oh, wait, this isn't the answer. This is clearly the difference between the Grihastha ashram and the Grihamedi ashram. Grihastha ashram means an ashram for seeking spiritual life. Grihamedi life, not Grihamedi ashram. Grihamedi life means simply about satisfying my senses. So this is the distinction as to what type of life as a householder will lead in our Krishna consciousness. Between a religious life and a life, as Prabhupada says here, Griham Ananda Kupam, a life living in the dark well. Existence in a dark well. We are trained by Srila Prabhupada. We're expected by Srila Prabhupada. We actually owe Srila Prabhupada a grihastha life not a Grihamedi life. And we can frankly say that the difference between the two is, quite frankly, this unchecked desire for sex life. Because everything else for the senses all circulates in this world. So we see here that it's not going to diminish on its own. We have to make an intelligent effort to diminish it. Prabhupada gives, I'll conclude with this one story here. Prabhupada gives this wonderful example. There was a prime minister and his king. They were talking, and the king said to the prime minister, up to what point in life does the sex desire finish? And the prime minister said, never. And the king said, no, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. The prime minister said, all right, I will make it proof to you at some point. So sometime later, the king received a message from the prime minister, quickly come to such and such man's house, he's dying, and bring your young daughter, the princess. So the king could understand, okay, there's something to be learned here. So he brought his young daughter. Outside of the room of the dying man, the prime minister said, when we enter into the room, make note of the dying man's vision. So as they entered into the room, now this is a common man. The king is coming to his deathbed to see him. This is a great honor. But when the man opened his eyes and saw coming, it mentions that he immediately looked to the princess. So the prime minister mentioned this, the king noted it, and then he understood what the king was saying. So unless we make a concerted effort to give up sense gratification, a concerted effort to control our senses, not to not enjoy them, we have to eat, but to eat only Krishna Prasadam. We have to hear Krishna Katha, Srimad Bhagavatam like this, to dovetail our senses in this way. This is a Krishna conscious grihastha life, not a life where we're victimized by the opposite spouse. The pursuit of sex life is not, the activity of sex life is not restricted. The pursuit of it as our goal is. Many times when I've had the opportunity over the last 15 years of preaching at the famous Woodstock Festival in Poland with Indra Swami, my favorite activity there is the question and answer booth, which sometimes I'm fortunate enough to do for 6 hours a day. And one common question is, well, I hear that you Hare Krishnas don't believe in sex life. And I always answer it the same way. Well, I've got 3 children and 5 grandchildren. So somebody had sex. And this always lightens the mood. They get a chuckle, and then begin to explain the point. So it's not that the activity of having sex and producing children is given up, but it is dovetailed in a manner that does not completely hold the consciousness. So we're going to finish there. We're opening this up for questions and answers. There may be some. If there are, I'll try to answer them. Let's see where things go with that. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak on this very uncontroversial subject matter.
Thank you, Chaturatma Prabhu. Wonderful presentation. Very balanced. Okay, dear devotees, please go ahead, ask your question. Contribute to class. I see that they're in the chat board. Gail says, I'm dying laughing about the plucking of the eyebrows.
Well, it is a practice, it happens, it happens all the time.
Okay, we have a question. Go ahead. Isabel?
Yes. Good morning, and thank you for such a wonderful class. I was having a lot of thoughts here with this. It's it's something that you said towards the end, that it's not just the man, it's also the women. But I was looking at it as a different way. In today's society, it's promoted so much that a man not being able to function as a man is not good. And there's all this advertisement to say, no, you have to keep on going. I think you know what I mean, but I'm talking about like Viagra and stuff like that. And
The
in
moving
turn,
part.
yeah. But I think when men don't realize, some, that okay, they're not functioning, and it's not about them. It's just nature. That's the way the body is, right? We start losing certain functions, but when they take these medications, they're affecting the woman, because if the woman is more or less their age, they're also losing the desire for sexual activity, and it's putting so much pressure. And then what happens is, okay, well, you don't want to do this. I'm going to go out and do it with somebody younger. And it's causing so much more suffering. And the reason why I feel so strongly about this is I have a very, very good friend. We've known each other since we were 9 years old, and he suffers from this. And, instead of cheating, he goes to pornography, which just makes this whole situation horrible. And so how do I explain these things to somebody who's not on the bhakti path? Because I try to help him, and he's like, no, that's not going to work for me when I try to explain these things to him. And I just wish, like, it's almost like being a yoga teacher and you try to explain spirituality in class, and they're just like, I just want to do a headstand and crow and jump from one thing to another. So how do you gently pepper that into a conversation with somebody who is spiritual and religious, but not on this bhakti path that practices, you know, this, spiritual growth as you get older, and, abstinence from sex as being something good,
The important point
besides
that
replaying this class?
Yeah, the important point that you made there is the getting older. It's just the natural function of the body that certain activities are going to diminish. And for one who is convinced that they are the body, that they are the senses, the diminishment of those things is seen as the greatest threat. So thus, as you're politely stepping around the subject, the use of Viagra or things of that nature, the pursuant of stimulation by pornography, the abandonment of long-time relationships in marriage for the pursuit of younger women that can satisfy one sexually. So this is all the function of a materially guided society. This is a function of a society that has forgotten the basic math. As Prabhupada would say, 2 + 2 = 4. If we think that 2 + 2 = 5, then everything we do mathematically after that is going to be wrong. So if our basic assumption is that I am this body and that I can satisfy these senses, and therefore I have to do whatever it takes at whatever age to do so, then everything we try and do after that is going to be out of sync. So we have to bring people back to the basic principle of not being the body. And this is difficult, especially in a society, as you say, where all of the advertising, all of the promotion, all of the encouragement is that to the nth degree, pursue the satisfaction of the senses up to the very dying breath. It's a laughable scenario for anybody that is getting a little older. It's a laughable scenario that I can just enjoy this body to the end. So this is the first principle that you have to try and help your friend understand, that we're not this body. Regardless of whether it's the male or the female in the relationship, whether one's attracted to the wife or the husband or exploited by the wife or husband, that part of it really isn't the principle. The principle is to understand the basic Bhagavad Gita. We're not this body, and this body and its senses will not bring us fulfillment. And as the body diminishes, we see through the pages of the Bhagavatam, every single situation, as the body is diminishing, people are pursuing spiritual consciousness. So this is the only way we can help society at large to realize this foundational math principle. 2 + 2 = 4, not 5. We're not this body, we're the spirit soul. And then we can help them move on in other aspects. That would be my offering, my suggestion in that regards.
No, but yeah, thank you very much. I was tiptoeing around it and not getting to the foundation. And yeah, thank you. That definitely helps me. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Sometimes Prabhupada would say in a class, when it was clear he was talking about, just mentioning a verse in, I was giving class the other day at the temple, and there was a verse in which it was clear Prabhupada was indicating animal slaughter and meat eating and things, and particularly the practice of veal of taking the calf and like that. And he said, and Prabhupada simply said, and subjects that are not mentionable in these pages of the Bhagavatam. So sometimes in polite society, we skirt around things, but sometimes we have to speak very openly as well, so we're understood.
Thank you, Chaturatma Prabhu, for not being intimidated by those subjects. Thank you.
Well, I've been married for 40 something years, and, I've been a devotee for 50 something years. So at a certain point, you have to be comfortable talking about anything. As I mentioned, when I go to Woodstock, they'll raise their hand and say, can I ask you such and such? Hey, you can ask me anything. I'm not, whatever, ask, that's the only way we learn is by addressing these subjects straight up.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, do we have another question from the audience or a contribution? Sundarananda Prabhu, let's go.
Hare Krishna. I thank you, Chaturatma Prabhu, for the wonderful class. When I think of you, we remember your dynamic energy at Sadhu Sangha as a master of ceremonies there. Hoping to see you sometime. So Prabhu, just a question aside from this, you mentioned that you do the Woodstock Festival with Indra Swami. Is that still planned in the coming years?
The Woodstock Festival is not something that we individually organize. We're part of the larger Woodstock Festival, and that's up to the promoters. That we won't know till next year. I would imagine, seeing the direction the world is going after the pandemic and the lockdown and all of that stuff, that things are going to move back to a better scenario. So we can hope that we'll be a part of that. I sure hope we are, because I enjoy that like anything.
Yep, great. All right, looking forward. All right, thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
I do know this, that it's pretty solid at this point, or looking very solid, that we will be having the Sadhu Sangha program in 2022.
Jai. Haribol.
You heard it first from me.
Yep, we'll remember that.
Hare Krishna. Anything else, Prabhu?
Okay. Looks like that's it. Thank you very much, Chaturatma Prabhu. Thanks everyone for contributing to this class. Chaturatma Prabhu, we can't wait to have you back next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being who you are. I just wanted to throw that in. Thank you. We need that kind of Vaishnavas.
Well, I got to be who I am because everybody else is taken. It's all I got.
Nice. That's a good one. Thank you very much.
To all of you, I appreciate this opportunity to speak on Srimad Bhagavatam. Look forward to meeting with you all again in the future. Hare Krishna, all glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Bye.
Hare Krishna.